Warming expert. Arctic is screaming. The Arctic is screaming, says one. Another calls 2007 a watershed year. Washington. An already relentless melting of the Arctic greatly accelerated this summer. A warning sign that some scientists worry could mean global warming has passed an ominous tipping point. One even speculated that summer sea ice would be gone in 5 years. Greenland's ice sheet melted nearly 19 billion tons more than the previous high mark, and the volume of Arctic sea ice at summer's end was half what it was just 4 years earlier, according to new NASA satellite data obtained by the Associated Press. The Arctic is screaming, said Mark Cerezi, senior scientist at the U.S. government's National Snow and Ice Data Center in Boulder, Colorado. Sea ice, which floats on water, is a key climate signal, as well as prime habitat for walruses and polar bears. In the Arctic, ice sheets, for their part, lock water on land but raise sea levels if that ice starts to melt. Just last year, 2 top scientists surprised their colleagues by projecting that the Arctic sea ice was melting so rapidly that it could disappear entirely very soon. This week, after reviewing his own data, NASA climate scientist Jay Zwally warned that at this rate, the Arctic Ocean could be nearly ice-free at the end of summer by 2012, much faster than previous predictions. So, scientists in recent days have been asking themselves these questions. Was the record melt seen all over the Arctic in 2007 a blip amid relentless and steady warming? Or has everything sped up to a new climate cycle that goes beyond the worst-case scenarios presented by computer models? The canary has died. The Arctic is often cited as the canary in the coal mine for climate warning, said Zwally, who as a teenager hauled coal. Now, as a sign of climate warming, the canary has died. It is time to start getting out of the coal mines. It is the burning of coal, oil, and other fossil fuels that produces carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, responsible for man-made global warming. For the past several days, government diplomats have been debating in Bali, Indonesia, the outlines of a new climate treaty calling for tougher limits on these gases. What happens in the Arctic has implications for the rest of the world. Faster melting there means eventual sea level rise and more immediate changes in winter weather because of less sea ice. In the United States, a weakened Arctic blast moving south to collide with moist air from the Gulf of Mexico can mean less rain and snow in some areas, including the drought-stricken southeast. Atlanta could be in a lot of trouble, said Michael McCracken, a former federal climate scientist who now heads the nonprofit Climate Institute. Some regions, like Colorado, would likely get extra rain or snow. More than 18 scientists told the AP that they were surprised by the level of ice melt this year. It's more than ever before, and faster too. I don't pay much attention to one year, but this year the change is so big, so huge, particularly in the Arctic sea ice, that you've got to stop and say, what is going on here? You can't look away from what's happening here, said NASA's chief of Cryospheric Sciences. This is going to be a watershed year. 2007 shattered records for Arctic melt in the following ways. 552 billion tons of ice melted this summer from the Greenland ice sheet, according to preliminary satellite data to be released by NASA. That's 15% more than the annual average summer melt, beating 2005's record. A record amount of surface ice was lost over Greenland this year, 10% more than the previous worst year, 2005, according to data the University of Colorado released Monday. That's nearly quadruple the amount that melted just 15 years ago. It's an amount of water that could cover Washington, D.C. a half-mile deep, researchers calculated. The surface area of summer sea ice floating in the Arctic Ocean this summer was nearly 23% below the previous record. The dwindling sea ice already has affected wildlife, with 6,000 walruses coming ashore in northwest Alaska in October for the first time in recorded history. Another first, the Northwest Passage was open to navigation. Still to be released is NASA data showing the remaining Arctic sea ice to be unusually thin, another record. That makes it more likely to melt in future summers. Combining the shrinking area covered by sea ice with the new thinness of the remaining ice, scientists calculate that the overall volume of ice is half of 2004's total. Alaska's frozen permafrost is warming. Not quite thawing yet, but getting close, which will release huge amounts of methane gas to contribute to global warming more rapidly than ever before. But temperature measurements 66 feet deep in the frozen soil rose nearly 0.4 of a degree from 2006 to 2007, according to measurements from the University of Alaska. While that may not sound like much, it's very, very significant, said a University of Alaska professor. Greenland, in particular, is a significant bellwether. Most of its surface is covered by ice. If it completely melted, it could add more than 21 feet to the world's sea level. However, for nearly the past 30 years, the data pattern of its ice sheet melt has zigzagged. A bad year like 2005 would be followed by a couple of lesser years. According to that pattern, 2007 shouldn't have been a major melt year, but it was, said Conrad Steffen of the University of Colorado, which gathered the latest data. I'm quite concerned, he said. Now I look at 2008. Will it be even warmer than the past year? Other new data from a NASA satellite measures ice volume. A NASA geophysicist, reviewing it and other Greenland numbers, concluded, we are quite likely entering a new regime. Melting of sea ice and Greenland's ice sheets also alarm scientists because they become part of a very troubling spiral. White sea ice reflects about 80% of the sun's heat off Earth. NASA's Zwally said, when there is no sea ice, about 90% of the heat goes into the ocean, which then warms everything else up. Warmer oceans then lead to even more melting. That feedback is the key to why the models predict that the Arctic warming is going to be faster. Wally said, it's getting even worse than all the models predicted. Faster and faster. NASA scientist James Hansen, the lone wolf researcher often called the godfather of global warming, on Thursday will tell scientists and others at a meeting of researchers in San Francisco that in some ways Earth has hit one of his so-called tipping points based on Greenland melt data. We have passed that and some other tipping points in the way that I will define them, Hansen said in an email. We have not passed a point of no return. Not yet, but we're getting close. We can still roll things back in time. It is going to require a very quick turn in direction. Yes, it's going to take a lot of work to turn it around. These are more signs of last days, and there are multitudes upon multitudes of them. Yes, more signs than ever before.